for life.
All right, good morning, everybody. Today it's Thursday, March 21st. It's 8 o'clock. This is a Finance Committee meeting of the Darien Board of Education. Before I get started, thanks for covering for me during my medical emergency, everybody. I'm glad to be back and almost at full capacity. So hopefully we run through this meeting like we always do pretty efficiently. So the first agenda item, and the next Finance Committee meeting is April 11th. So the first agenda item is the review of the February 2024 financial report. Rich.
Excuse me. So this is the financial report through February. Through February, we are forecasting a projected deficit of 162,652. Of this deficit, 441,625 relates to special education. The changes from January were a positive $65,716. We'll run through those changes. Now that the winter season is just about behind us, we are releasing $20,000 in snow removal. This does track along with the budget that was approved by the board. Use of fields rental fees are slightly better as we've had more participants this year than expected. Gate receipts for basketball were slightly better than expected by $550. The adult education cooperative with Stanford Public Schools came in $500 under budget. Excess costs we did file for our March 1st filing. Based on that filing and the reimbursement rate that's tentatively set by the state in January, it is $5,534 less than anticipated. Pupil evaluations in special education are trending higher, and we do have a recommended transfer for this by $24,000. Utilities are a positive $20,000. The assistant principal in Hindley is forecasted a positive $35,250, and that's because the assistant principal is moving into the principal position, which then leaves savings in the assistant principal account. The ELP account is better by $5,500. We do have some partial payments for students that started mid-year. Overall, the general education RCs are a positive $278,974. And again, the special education RCs are a deficit of $441,625. Just going through the RCs that have changes, no change in RC 1, 3, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10. Again, in 11, basketball receipts exceeded expectations by $550. In RC 12, we do have $18,170 in additional field rental revenue due to an increase in the number of participants. No changes in RC 13, 15, 16, 18, 19, or 21. And then in RC 23, adult education is a positive balance of $500 due to that cooperative with Stanford Public Schools. Moving to RC 24, as I mentioned earlier, we did file for excess cost. Our final submission on March 1st, we did submit an amount of $4,067,716. So based on that reimbursement rate of 68.06%, which can change prior to the final payment in May, we are anticipated receiving just over $2.7 million. We did receive the first installment of excess cost in February, and that was $2,079,601. And again, that final reimbursement will be paid at the end of May. We are forecasting a deficit, as I mentioned, in pupil evaluations. Due to the rise in the number of students needing outside evaluations and the cost of the evaluations, we do want to flag that we will likely need to revise up the budget for fiscal year 25 in this account as well. We've seen an uptick of about 14% in the quantity of students needing outside evaluations. Moving to RC 25, the main change is heat. We did have a warmer than expected winter, and so consumption has been down, and so we are forecasting a positive balance of $39,000 through February. And then in RC 26, ELP tuition currently forecasts a surplus of just over $8,900. As we had mentioned, we did add 2 additional students. Those payments have been received. I would just note that if a student receives an IEP between now and the end of the school year, there'd be a partial refund.
Any questions?
Thanks, Rich. I would just be interested in the pupil evaluations, just if there's any additional color in terms of like what type of evaluations those are and any foresight we have. I know you said that, I think there's a note here about revising the budget up.
Yes. So there's 2 factors that's causing the upward pressure. One is the cost of the evaluations. The cost of the evaluations have close to doubled. So in the budget that was approved by the board, we did put in an extra $75,000 within that account, but it's also now quantity. And so we've had more students getting outside evaluations. It could be anything from psychology evaluations, outside, needs for the students in terms of what they're going to need going forward. There's also a limited number of options available to the district. And when you have a limited number of options, it drives the price up. So we have seen quite the uptick, I would say, probably just in the last couple of months in terms of quantities.
I'm sorry, let me just follow up. These are outside evaluations, right? What drives the difference between the number of outside evaluations?
So I'd probably defer to Shirley, but I would
Okay.
imagine it's the recommendations in the PD too.
Alan, do you have anything to add or?
It just be the actual needs of the students, and also the parents wanting to have an outside evaluation also.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, that actually is kind of along the lines of my question, which is like, what is driving the referrals for these? Are these being requested by parents or are these being referred by staff?
So I have to defer to Shirley probably on that. It
Okay.
could be a mixture of both, I would imagine.
Because when you look at the original budget versus our forecast now, this
So you're-
line has increased
Over
208, over $200,000. And I'm just, it seems like it's a forward indicator of future needs. And I'm really, I'd like to get our arms around this a little bit more about what's really going on here. And then the only other question I had on the, on the budget review, what the RC 24 deficit in other parts of the packet is shown as negative 450,000 versus the 441. And I couldn't tell what was the difference or if it was excess cost.
So we include within the special education RCs, ELP as well. So you have a little bit positive ELP because of that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions?
John, I'm thinking maybe as part of your recommendations, does the committee want to recommend that we take a more extensive look at evaluations, both the financial and the educational trends, maybe to the board, that becomes an agenda item in your
Yeah,
recommendations?
Certainly. You make the agenda, so it sounds like a good idea. All for it. Katie, anything or? Okay. Can you just quickly go through the grants before we go on to the next line item?
Sure. So there are no new grants to report. We did receive, which we mentioned, I believe, last month, the donation from the Darien Foundation for Robotics and then the initial installment for the video wall. And so those processes have started. Dr. McCarthy did mention at the last board meeting about a potential grant for transition services. It was posted by the state and then it was closed by the state, in part because they opened it in March and then expected everybody to spend the money by June, and not release the money until mid to end of April, which by then you're not really going to be able to do much. The anticipated award for that is $25,000. So we'll see when that actually opens up again.
Okay, thank you. Next agenda item, the budget transfers for February 2020.
So we do have two transfers that we're recommending for approval. The first is for $139,317. This would cover the deficit in consultant services for the RBTs that were added. We are recommending a number of accounts to cover that from, $20,000 from snow removal, $40,000 from water as the rate that the projected Aquarians request for a large rate hike. The savings from heat, the ELP tuition additional revenue, the repairs and technology, the lower consumption for sewer, the less claims for unemployment, sessions at Royal, the small amount of money from adult education, and then the increased revenue associated with youth participants for field rentals. And then the second transfer is to cover that $24,000 for pupil evaluations. And we would recommend taking that from technology equipment savings, salary savings for secretarial position, again, unemployment claims, and then some maintenance equipment savings.
Okay. Any questions on the transfers? I would, oh, go ahead, Rob.
Just one question. The transfer for consultant services, I just want to clarify with the memo that's at the end of the packet for the supplemental appropriation, that appropriation amount assumes that this transfer is
It's
actually
approved.
taking place, correct?
Correct.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, so I would recommend that we bring these transfers to the board with a positive recommendation. But, okay. Seeing a lot of nods, yes. Okay. The last, not last agenda item, but the last having to do with the financials, review of special appropriation request for fiscal year 24 special education expenditures. I would maybe, if I didn't have a chance to review the agenda, but maybe just, I would consider this a review of appropriation request for the fiscal year 24 budget deficit in its entirety. Okay.
So we've been talking all year about the projected deficit, and so we wanted to spell out the timeline for potentially going to the town for additional funds to cover that deficit. In total, the accounts added up to a deficit prior to excess cost of just under $1 million at $984,000. And then with the additional excess cost revenue, just about $875,000. The board has approved or potentially will approve on Tuesday transfers that would cover $596,000 of that deficit. And those transfers have come from a variety of accounts, including one under enrolled section at homes, health insurance savings due to census changes, salary savings due to turnover in administrative positions, negotiated settlements with paraprofessionals and the secretaries, additional summer school revenue, utility savings, and some small operating savings. So if those transfers are approved on Tuesday night, the special education deficit would be $278,308. Overall, the deficit throughout the budget would be that $162,000, as we are leaving certain funds still as positive balances in the general education RCs. So it's important to note that we will not run out of cash really until the end of June. So our biggest cash outlay for the district is in June, when teachers have the right to elect 22 or 26 pays. And so the teachers who elect 26 pays get what's called a balloon payment. It's essentially 4 payments in June. And so that's our biggest cash outlay. So we're not going to run out of actual money until, mid-June. And so what we're recommending is for at the next finance committee to bring a number forward in terms of what to potentially request to the town. And then the Board of Education would vote to approve that amount at the second board meeting in April. And then if the Board of Education approves that amount in April, we go to the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, and then assuming approval, the RTM, and then we would have those funds towards the end of May, beginning of June.
So, Rich, my question is, when I look at the projected deficit, 162,652, and then this number 278,308, there's about $116,000 difference. So which number would we bring forth on after the April 11th Finance Committee meeting?
So I would recommend bringing whatever the net deficit is, so between the general education RCs and the special education RCs. So it would be that 162, assuming nothing changes between now and the next month. The things that could potentially change, as we saw this month, is if you have a staff member who leaves mid-year, you'll free up salary savings. That could bring that down. If there are any other items that we're waiting to purchase that we get a better price point, that could bring it down. And so we'll have one more month to bring potential transfers to the board to consider to bring down that deficit.
Okay.
If we don't have any, then we would expect to bring that 162 or so.
Okay, perfect. Robin?
Just one question. So I think I missed some of your verbal commentary. So you would not, the 278 projected deficit, you're thinking that would not be the case? It would be closer to the 162 that we're trending
So the
now?
278 is just for the special education RCs.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Um,
Okay.
So we are, as of right now, still leaving certain amounts of money in the general education
Okay.
RCs. In some areas like electricity, and so while we're forecasting a positive, we want to make sure that there's not going to be a spike in the next couple of months, as an example. We still have that deficit for staff turnover in the general education RCs, and so we've left a lot of salary saving accounts that essentially offset that. And so the idea would be to kind of collapse those two as you're ready to ask for appropriation.
And this is the net deficit after the excess cost
Correct.
projection?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Which is still could be a bit of a swing factor.
So it
too.
could. So the one thing that's still an outlier is what that final reimbursement rate will be. So our submissions are done to the state for this fiscal year. And right now, the state has indicated 68% to the reimbursement rate. So after everybody's filed on March 1st, they'll see if anybody else had big swings throughout the state. It's a collective pool, and then they'll either increase or decrease depending on those submissions.
And in previous years, I mean, that has been a big positive swing factor when we return, funds to the town.
It has. So if we
this
look-
year seems like it's a little different now.
So if we look at last year, the overwhelming majority of the money that was returned to the town was additional excess cost reimbursement. and that had to do with the reimbursement rate. So right now, the reimbursement rate at 68% is a lot lower than it's typically been.
Okay, and then from a calendar standpoint, I think this fits well with working with our partners in town. I think it gives them enough room to, have their appropriate review and meetings. But again, not put us in a deficit situation where we have to make cuts in June because we don't have the funds. So I guess I like this timeline that you guys have outlined. It gives this board, this committee, and then this board the opportunity to kind of weigh in and put the wheels in motion and pass it through. And then they can, the Board of Finance and the RTM can figure out the best timing. But again, we'd love to probably receive the funds in June, perhaps the appropriation in June.
And stating the obvious, if somehow we make it up, it gets returned to the time.
Yeah, absolutely. There's not going to be any pre-buys or anything. At least I don't foresee that unless somebody recommends it. So
No.
any other questions, comments? Go ahead, Joe.
Rich, when you put this together for Tuesday's board meeting, would you please add a summary of the transfers, a numerical summary, so we can see, especially with our budget being reviewed simultaneously, I think it's helpful if this board is conversant in how we covered the offset. And then would you add an explanation, please, to the what was discussed here, that when we actually go to the Board of Finance, we would go for the actual deficit, not the projected shortfall in this category. Thank you.
Yeah, net deficit, right? Yeah. Thank you. Sir.
Can I just make a clarification just about the pupil evaluation? Did you want a further explanation as the subcommittee reports out? Or do you want to are we talking about having a separate agenda item for Tuesday night?
I think maybe for Tuesday night, why don't you provide a sense of the magnitude? I think there's a longer discussion, to Robin's point of it being a forward-looking indicator. There's probably some discussion to be had about sort of what the trajectory has been following our evaluations in terms of financial forecasting. Again, these are individual decisions, so I realize that it's hard, but at least for Tuesday, it would be helpful to understand the magnitude.
And I can do that. I can do that within
Mhm.
the scope of the report. Is that okay?
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
perfect. Yeah.
Dr. Adley, I would just add to that, the one question I had is why we are having to outsource the evaluations as opposed to our in-house psychologists, and because that's one question that I'm not really clear on either.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that it's helpful to hear from Shirley. It might be helpful for her to attend some of these. I can just say quickly though, that there are different levels of evaluations, right? Like they're the school psychologists and the way that they're trained versus clinical and versus what's going on. So some of those conversations are very individual in nature and I think can happen in a sensitive way. John, I did have one question, but it's a
Okay, go
separate
ahead.
topic. So it's when we're done. Rich, I just wanted to ask, there's one note in here on the food service financial report where you had mentioned coming back to the committee about Tokenique. Would that be planned for the next April meeting?
Yes, so right now we're working with an architect through Chartwells, kind of figure out what has to be done. And then similar to what we did at Oxbridge and some of the other equipment needs that we need, we would make a recommendation to draw off the fund balance within the food service account. And so we would obviously have to buy a dishwasher, the materials, and then there'd have to be like some plumbing work and electrical work.
No, that's really exciting. Thank you. I'm just looking for the timeline. So look forward to that.
Dishwasher, really exciting. I love it.
Well, it's actually, it's a really big deal. You know, the district before Oxford was online, all 7 of our schools were using completely disposable things, which is a lot of trash and a lot of cost that we pay for trash. So it's exciting to think about the district moving forward in a sustainability.
Love it. Okay, next is public comment.
Good morning. Would anybody in person like to participate in public comment? If anybody online would like to participate, please indicate the raised hand icon. We have no raised hands at this time.
Oh, well, thank you, Cass. So could I get a motion to adjourn? I got Robin, I got Katie, all in favor?